Hey, Stefan. So, I mean,
Hey,
Stefan, you really need no introduction, at least for me personally, but maybe for people who are new to the space, who are listening today, maybe it would be great if you can just give a brief introduction and then get on with your talk today. But really happy to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me. So yeah, I'm Stefan George. I'm one of the co-founders of Gnosis, and yeah, I personally have been building in the blockchain space for now a decade. So over 10 years ago, we started working on Bitcoin and built some of the first applications for Bitcoin. Then we discovered also Ethereum super early on, like 2014, when the white paper was published by Vitalik. And we saw the opportunity that we could rebuild what we built previously for Bitcoin on Ethereum, but more decentralized. We joined Consensus very early on. So we were like employee number 3 and 4 in Consensus. And we started the Gnosis journey as part of Consensus and building prediction markets. 2017, we did one of the first ICOs, spun off from Consensus to focus on prediction markets. But this was so early that a lot of tooling was missing, including, for example, a multi-signature wallet, which we built, which then later on turned into Safe. And we also realized that exchange infrastructure at that time did not exist, which we obviously needed to have a prediction market. So we built also the first AMM designs. And yeah, also already thought many years before the term MEV was coined, how to protect users from MEV, and all this research finally led to CowSwap, an exchange that was also incubated within Gnosis. And then about 2 years ago, we merged with the XDAI network. XDAI was was the first sidechain to Ethereum. And we rebranded XDAI to Gnosis Chain, changing the technological roadmap to actually follow Ethereum. So Gnosis Chain now is operated by the second largest beacon chain after Ethereum, and with a goal to make it a very decentralized network. So I would argue actually even today, Gnosis Chain is, after Bitcoin and Ethereum, probably the most decentralized network, just in terms of number of validators and node operators. And and now we try to combine again like the pieces that we built in the past. And one important piece is obviously the safe. And the safe is very important also for a topic that recently got a lot of attention, account abstraction. So also there, I would say, like, we actually have been working on account abstraction for like maybe 3-4 years. I remember I did a tweet like a couple of years ago where I tweeted, like, for the first time, it was possible to send an Ethereum transaction, but not paying with Ether, but instead paying with a token. And that was enabled through the safe. The term account abstraction didn't really exist at the time, but it's actually one of the features that is enabled through account abstraction. And yeah, today I want to talk about account abstraction, explain like what this term actually means and how we can enable it on blockchain today. And I think it's a very important topic, especially for improving user experience on blockchain, which I feel at this point is actually what we have to focus on. So I think a lot of research has been done for scalability. And I think right now, scalability is actually not our bottleneck. I feel our bottleneck is actually creating better user experiences and allowing more users to interact with what we've been building and creating new use cases that are more appealing for everyday users. So kind of going away from the pure speculative use case to something that is more important on a daily life basis. And with that being said, I'd like to start and explain to you what actually is account abstraction. And let's take a look. So on EVM networks, we have two different types of accounts. Externally owned accounts. Those are the accounts that all of us are using when we use MetaMask, for example. They compose of a private and public key pair. When we are sending a transaction, we are signing actually a transaction with a private key, which is then propagated through the network. The private key has very little state. So in case of Ethereum accounts, there's only like the Ether balance, for example, and the nonce, which makes sure that you cannot replay transactions. And yeah, with an EUA account, we can originate transactions on Ethereum. Contrary to this, there's a smart contract account or contract account, which is controlled by code. It can be triggered from EUA accounts, and it can actually execute code. The slide is wrong. And yeah, so now we have these two different types of accounts on Ethereum and any other EVM network. And now account abstraction, kind of the term already explains that it's about abstracting away from those two types of accounts. And that is the goal of account abstraction. And yeah, basically having only the concept of one account, which is merging those two concepts. So here I took a screenshot of the roadmap of Ethereum, according to Vitalik. It's kind of zoomed out a little bit, but we are effectively here on the upper left corner, the merge, and then it just continues down up to the very end of the roadmap. And we see that according to Vitalik, the end game of account abstraction is actually at a very late state. And this is because it's actually very difficult to accomplish account abstraction on the protocol level of Ethereum itself. It's not easy to do those migrations. There are actually other networks that have account abstraction enabled as part of their protocol, like, for example, Starknet. But this is only possible because they could redefine a protocol from scratch. Right? They did not have to migrate. And migrations usually was really a pain. And yeah, so Vitalik kind of pushed this back into the distant future. And who knows if it actually will ever be part of Ethereum. We don't know at this point. But the great thing is that all the benefits that account abstraction can bring, we can actually enable today using regular smart contract accounts. And that is something I would like to explain to you now. So before we look into smart contract accounts, let's just recap of how we use dApps today. Or like what's the life cycle of an EUA account. So if you create an EUA account in, for example, MetaMask, you click on create account, you create effectively like a private key, which is stored. You have to do a backup of this, like storing a seed phrase. Then you have to purchase Ether, or you have to somehow get Ether onto your account. Then you can actually send a transaction by signing a transaction. And you also have to sign the amount of gas you want to spend on this transaction to incentivize a miner or builder to include your transaction. Then you have to wait for the transaction to be mined, and it eventually fails for different reasons. And then you can eventually continue. So this is not a simple process, obviously. And I think this is kind of one of the main reasons why we have not been able to onboard a lot more users to our ecosystem. It's still pretty niche, and it requires actually quite some understanding for how blockchain in general works in order to even do a transaction.
So, Stefan, just to be clear, I definitely know like there are many groups like in this ecosystem that are talking about like protocol level account abstraction or simply implementing it with smart contracts. So, what is the kind of stance that is taken by Gnosys Chain? Like, are you guys trying to implement it at the protocol level, or kind of just trying to remain like more equivalent to like Ethereum mainnet? Like, how are you guys actually approaching it?
Yeah, very good question. So Gnosis Chain is the most close network to Ethereum because we use exactly the same technology stack. Like no other network has this. And we see actually a big benefit in this because it's just not any other network comes close in terms of number of developers and researchers improving the network as Ethereum. So just to give an example, Ethereum is introducing proto-danksharding. And this requires, for example, to have a beacon chain as your consensus layer. And other than Gnosis Chain, there's no other major network operating a beacon chain. So those upgrades, Polygon cannot do it, Binance Smart Chain cannot do it, we can do it. The downside of following Ethereum is that it's very hard to deviate from the roadmap. So for us, it's basically impossible to introduce changes on the core layer. However, we see the opportunity to implement innovations on the layer above. So right now, what we see is there's a lot of innovation happening on the transaction layer, on the relayer layer. Like we have flashbots builders on Ethereum, and that's actually something where we can implement interesting changes. And so, for example, we're looking into allowing meta transactions to be propagated to those as well, which are inherent, like safe, like account abstracted transactions. So on this level, we can innovate, but on the core protocol layer, that is not feasible. That would push us back in terms of timelines very significantly. And I kind of agree with Vitalik, like it's actually implementing account abstraction on Ethereum is super, super hard. And so it's better to just focus on the layer above and yeah, make, like, of course, as us as an ecosystem, we have quite some let's say or influence in terms of how dApps are using account abstraction. And that's ultimately also what I would like to get to is it's not only about like having a smart contract account in place, but it's also about making dApp developers aware of the possibilities of smart contract accounts. I'll get back to this later, but yeah, it just will make user experience for any dApp a lot better, but only if the dApp also acknowledges that there is a smart contract account. Cool. Yeah, going back to the presentation. So there are obvious like drawbacks of EUA accounts. Most of us, we are aware, like, yeah, if you lose access to the account, you lose access to everything. If someone is getting access to an account, they get access to everything. There's no control in terms of you can scope control for different applications. So it's either everything or nothing. And if we consider that we would actually like to have our identities attached to blockchain accounts, then this is obviously something that needs to be improved. And well, in the past, many have been victims to attacks such as phishing and other things where people lost basically access to everything. So now, how does it look like when we interact with a smart contract account? So the simplest interaction, and that's how most people are interacting with the safe multisig today, is you still have a user who has an EUA account with Ether, and they can send a transaction to the smart contract account. Let's say someone wants to execute a multi-signature transaction on Gnosis Safe today, then the Safe is a smart contract account, but you still interact with it like you would interact with Uniswap, for example. So you have an account with Ether, you send a transaction, you trigger a transaction from the Safe multisig. And well, that's obviously not a lot better than what we had before, but the Safe contract account or like account abstracted accounts, they actually have other features which can make this much nicer. And one obvious one is actually using a relayer to transact. And what smart contract accounts enable you to do is to split the responsibility from defining what the transaction should do from the responsibility to actually mine this transaction and include this transaction into the blockchain itself. And this is possible via a concept that we call meta transactions. So a meta transaction defines what the user would like to do. Let's say user would like to do a trade on Uniswap. He can define this in a meta transaction, and then he can send this meta transaction to what we call a relayer. The relayer can wrap this meta transaction into a real Ethereum transaction and send it to a miner or block builder and make sure that this transaction is actually being included in the block. So the relayer takes the responsibility of pricing the transaction, making sure it's actually included. And because a smart contract account, we can even implement features, and the Safe has this also natively built in to refund the relayer for his work. And the interesting thing is this refund can be done not only in Ether, it can be done in any other token. I mentioned this example, like I'm sending an Ethereum transaction, but I actually pay with USDC, for example. And that solves another big issue, right? Like today, if I would like to send someone money, let's say DAI or USDC, I need to have two currencies in my account because I always need Ether. With account abstraction, I actually don't. I can have only DAI in my account, and I can pay for the Ethereum transaction with DAI because I refund the relayer, the Ether that he is spending with DAI. So there's also other advantages in smart contract accounts which are related to security. Most obvious one is what we implement in the Safe Multisig. It's a multi-signature wallet. You have more than one authentication required in order to send something. In the multi-signature use case, it's like a team where multiple people have to confirm, but this also applies to even individual wallets where we can implement multi-factor authentication. So let's say I would like to send a transaction, then there could be 2 signatures required in order to transact. One is given by me, but then the other would be given by a service that could, for example, validate that I'm not interacting with accounts that I should not interact with. I don't know, that they got hacked or whatever. And that makes sure that, well, I'm not losing funds. And of course, multi-factor authentication can come in many ways. Could be 2 wallets that you control. Actually, we like initially built a mobile wallet also for Safe, which, for example, had 1 key on your phone and another key on your computer, and you would need to confirm with both in order to do transaction. There's also other concepts possible. So many of us, like when we actually log into a Web2 service, we generate a session key, right? Like a session key is something that is temporary for 1 session in order to authenticate against a service, let's say Facebook, Google, or whatever. And so far, this was a concept only being used in Web2. Now we can actually transform this to Web3 as well. So what we can do is we can create temporary keys that allow you to use your account for a certain application in a certain scope without risking anything else in this account. And it can also increase user experience significantly because with those accounts, you can even give those accounts the possibility to sign on your behalf. So for example, if you're playing a game and the game does many interactions, you probably don't want to sign like a MetaMask pop-up every few seconds. You just want to play the game. And at the same time, if this account would get access to all your funds, then you would definitely not like to give this permission. But if you have a session key that scopes exactly on what you want to do for this specific application, then great, this works and combines the best of 2 worlds. And that's also something that we can do with smart contract accounts. There's also other advantages that I want to mention in terms of better user experience. And I already mentioned this, kind of abstracting the concept of fees and who's paying for fees. Just to give like another example for this, you can actually have also other applications paying for fees, right? Like, so for example, for an application that is new, wants to attract users, now they can basically pay user fees on their behalf. And yeah, there are many concepts that are implementing this, many relayer services now implementing similar concepts like Gelato, for example, where an application can pay for user fees. There's also other ideas like user can himself have something that they call a gas tank, where like funds are stored, for example, on Gnosys Chain to pay for gas, but this gas tank can be used for any transaction on any network. So when I, for example, sign a transaction on Polygon, then the relayer can redeem those funds also on Gnosis Chain from the gas tank. That's useful because if you would have this logic always implemented on the same network where you do transactions, then potentially it's very expensive. Like, for example, if the gas tank would be on Ethereum, then this reimbursement transaction would actually become very costly because Ethereum is just the most expensive network to use.
Yeah, definitely, Stefan. This is incredible. So, in that case, like a Gnosis Chain kind of core contributors actually building like this relay network that kind of like any dApp can plug into,
Yes.
or is there an expectation that kind of dApp developers should be building like relay networks?
No, we already have. I mean, we're happy to support anyone who wants to build relay networks, but specifically for Gnosis Chain, we have like a strong collaboration with Gelato. And Gelato has also a strong relationship with Safe. So we actually created the Safe SDK, which allows you to directly connect to the Gelato relay network and send transactions and create these gas tanks. So basically everything is in place for a dApp developer to connect to. And you don't have to think too much about how those systems actually work. You can just assume they're working. Cool. Yeah, so those are very important. This is kind of the same thing. We can skip this slide. But there's one other thing I would like to mention that is also very important, and that's kind of ties back to the question of how dApps should be re-engineered in order to benefit from smart contract accounts. So today, if you use an EOA account and you want to do any interaction on dApps, like let's say you want to do a trade on Uniswap, then in most cases you have to first approve a token, and then you can do the actual trade. So you have at least 2 transactions. And that's still like a very simple interaction. Can be much more complex. For example, if you want to create a CDP on Maker and withdraw a DAI from the CDP, last time I counted, this was involving, I think, 7 transactions at least. And the interactions are always the same as I showed at the beginning. You have to sign a transaction, you have to price a transaction, you have to wait for a transaction to be mined to then do the next step. And that's just not a great experience. And in Web2, users are used to doing one click and then everything is executed. And yeah, now with Account Abstraction, we can reassemble the same experience. So what we can do is we can use a concept called multi-call. It allows to send multiple transactions, like a sequence of transactions from one account at once, so within one block. And yeah, so that basically solves the problem. Like you can do, like a dApp can, instead of having like triggering one transaction at a time, now it can just batch those transactions together, prompt the user once, user signs off once, and then everything's taken care of. And that's how we imagine the future of dApp interaction to look like. Again, it requires the user to have a smart contract account. The way how we would like to dApp developers to use this is like, they should always assume a user has a safe account, and if they don't, they can create one on their behalf, which is owned by them. So they can build the app like assuming everyone actually has a safe account, which then allows a much better user experience. So kind of summing up, why is Account Abstraction important to onboard the next wave of users? There's mostly 2 things: security and user experience. And yeah, this is just listing all the different features. It's just still like the tip of the iceberg, we will see. But I feel like those are the most important in order to make onboarding a lot simpler, and also just using blockchain a lot simpler. One topic I didn't talk about is transaction automation, actually. So what you can also do, we kind of touched on this with the game experience, where you just want like transactions to be signed automatically because you have little risk. But you can also do other things. So for example, let's say you have a CDP open on Maker. You want to make sure the CDP is never underwater and that you are liquidated. And that's something now you can also build into smart contract accounts, just like building a module, what we call module, which can be plugged into your safe account, which can send a transaction on your behalf, like trustlessly. If a service, a third-party service, detects that your CDP is at risk of being liquidated, it can transact on your behalf, but only for the CDP, to make sure that you're not liquidated. Those are like all the things that you can now do, smart contract accounts. And yeah, now I would like to explain you how this would actually work with the safe on a high level. So the safe as account abstraction. So the safe effectively is a smart contract account. And I think it's super relevant for the discussion of account abstraction. And this is simply relevant because it's the most trusted smart contract account today. It's kind of a graphic showing like most people associate the safe with the multi-signature use case, simply because that's the most prominent application. And most people using the safe today that are aware of they are using the safe are using it as a multi-signature wallet. But that's literally just the tip of the iceberg. Everything that I just explained in my presentation can be accomplished with safe contracts. And yeah, for this kind of technology, it's very important to have something that's trustworthy and that also has a strong ecosystem. And that is definitely the case for the safe contract today. So we have already over 9 billion transactions that were like executed via safe contracts. Yeah, safe contracts are the default way of storing funds. Over $70 billion of funds are stored in safe contracts. So it's a very trusted environment. And we also have simply a lot of users using safe contracts. Many of them are not aware they're using safe contracts. So for example, one prominent application that is using safe contracts for every user is WorldCoin. So every WorldCoin user is actually a safe account. And well, of course, they don't know, but they are.
So this one is called safe abstraction, right?
Well, yeah, we can call it.
You're one step ahead.
Yeah. So we basically, I mean, obviously, I've been working on this for a long time. Again, before even the term was coined, account abstraction. And we see it as like, it basically has all the features you need. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, right now there are multiple different initiatives, specifically also this EIP 4337 that tries to establish account abstraction. For the most part, those concepts are actually complementary. We try to find a future path where those concepts can converge to the same future. But especially for 4337, the main problem they're actually trying to solve is the relay problem. So I mentioned the relayer before. The relayer allows to send meta transactions. And the issue with meta transactions is, or this relayer is that, of course, right now it would be a pretty centralized service. You have like one centralized service where you can send transactions to, and then they're eventually included. And 4337 tries to build a decentralized relay network as part of their solution. So it's kind of complementary to what the safe contract allows you to do. Yeah, to go ahead. Yeah, very rich ecosystem already building on safe accounts. Many are only aware of the multisig use case, but in fact, if you use any of those applications, you're actually also using a safe account. So it's just definitely the most dominant contract for this kind of application. We are working on, like we recently released the first version of the Safe SDK, which is specifically targeting also account abstraction. And yeah, we build like different kits that allow you to do the different things that I mentioned before. What I did not mention is we also focus on on-ramp, so make it really easy to get users moving funds from fiat to crypto as well, and vice versa. So there we have some interesting integrations. We also specifically want to work on recovery. So I think recovery is still like an unsolved problem, actually, even though there are many ideas of how to solve it. Where smart contract accounts can be the future as well. And also a very important topic of smart contract accounts in general, it's also not a solved problem, it's actually multi-chain compatibility. So just to explain you what the issues are, like with an UA account, you assume always that you have the same address on every network. So no matter if you connect your MetaMask to Polygon, Ethereum, Gnosys Chain, Binance Smart Chain, you will always have the same account address. And that's not necessarily true for smart contract account, simply the way how the EVM works. And also networks have small differences in how they're implementing it. You might not have the same address on every network. And that is, of course, a user experience concern that we still have to solve. And there are many ideas of how to solve it, but so far there's not a clear standard.
Yeah, Stefan, this has been incredibly insightful. Unfortunately, we'll need to stop here just because we're a little bit over time, and the next speaker is in the waiting room. But thanks for such an incredibly insightful talk from Stefan. It's really great to see, like, first of all, like how instrumental Gnosis ecosystem has actually been in building the kind of core infrastructure that the space depends on, but then also how far ahead you guys, for example, with the safe implementation in terms of smart contract as like account abstraction and what that means for user experience and everything else. So yeah, thank you, Stefan, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day.